Dr. Russell Blaylock is a board-certified neurosurgeon, author, and lecturer. He attended the LSU School of Medicine in New Orleans and completed his general surgical internship and neurosurgical residency at the Medical Center of South Carolina in Charleston. During his residency, he ran the neurology program for a year and did a fellowship in neurosurgery after his residency. For the past 25 years, he has practiced neurosurgery in addition to having nutritional practice. He recently retired from both practices to devote full time to nutritional studies and research. During his research training, he worked with the eminent neurosurgeon, Dr. Ludwig Kempe. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Together, they developed the I hope I'm pronouncing this right, colosal removal of intravascular tumors, which is still used today. Dr. Blaylock presented these cases utilizing the technique to the Congress of Neurosurgical Surgeons. Folks, it goes on for page after page. He's one of the top now retired brain surgeons in the world, and he's done a lot of studies and reads every day all the other major studies about what these toxins in our environment are doing and ways to not ingest all those. I have a lot of questions today. You know, there's a video making the rounds on YouTube, a little 3-minute rant I did, where this caller calls in and can't talk. And he's saying I'm a liar about the U.S. bringing Nazis in. And I said, but it's all over the news. And folks have put articles about that, up over me talking. And I make the point, I say, sir, depending on the studies, 15 to 30% brain size reduction not being breastfed. And he got real mad about that. But, I mean, that's just one other little area. I mean, there's so much I want to talk to him about, and I'm very thankful for him joining us. And, Dr. Blaylock, it's good to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being on your program.
You bet. Thank you for sitting through my plugs. Out of the gates, tell folks about your books, your videos, your materials, your websites, here at the very start of the show for people that want to learn more.
Well, my website is www.russellblaylockmd.com. That's RussellBlaylockMD.com. And it has a section of free information. It's, I write papers about anything from mercury toxicity, vaccines, cholesterol, nonsense. And I have a paper on regimentation in medicine and the death of creativity, which people would be interested in if they're interested in the effect of collectivism on medicine. And I have some DVDs on nutrition and behavior, which talks about the effects of nutrition on how people think, as well as criminality, suicide risk, all of these things that we're hearing in the news today about our young people being uncontrollable, and the direct connection to diet and what you could do about it is discussed on this DVD. I have a newsletter that's published through newsmax.com, the Blaylock Wellness Report, which is a monthly report. I update all the things on nutrition. And I have several books. Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills was the original book, and it's about MSG and aspartame toxicity to the brain and nervous system. And then a general nutrition book was more recent. It's Health and Nutrition Secrets That Can Save Your Life, which covers all sorts of subjects: vaccination, fluoride, mercury toxicity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, a lot of different subjects. And it's very comprehensive. The third book is Natural Strategies for Cancer Patients, in which I reviewed a world of studies on nutrition and cancer suppression. Goes through how to not only use it primarily to treat cancers of various kinds, but also how it enhances the effectiveness of what's considered traditional cancer treatment and makes them less toxic. But these are two recent books, the last two. The excitotoxin book was updated in 1997, I think it was.
And it's all available at your website that we have up on screen for everybody watching at prisonplanet.tv. Just while you were talking there for a minute or two, Obama, the major changes, if they haven't taken over medicine already, now they're openly announcing it. I want to get into what SSRIs, just the toxicity alone, is doing, admitting that it causes suicide. I want to get into the youth that you mentioned. I want to get into the numbers we see with cancer being way up, why allergies are way up in people that have never had them. your take on the genetically modified organisms, creating all these new proteins and things that are, according to scientists we've interviewed, that are causing so many problems. I want to get into just kind of a laundry list covering a lot of subjects, what some of the more dangerous things are in foods we want to avoid, the excitotoxins, not just aspartame and things like MSG, but some of the other things that are out there. Where would you like to start first, Doctor?
Well, I think what I need to probably start with is discussion of how we came to what we call Orthodox medicine in the United States, because this is a source of great confusion. People are now inundated with the idea where there's Orthodox medicine, which is what we traditionally think of medicine and accepted, and then we have people working outside of Orthodox medicine, which is sort of frowned on. That's the people doing nutrition, vitamins, minerals, herb usage, etc. And so you need to kind of understand, well, who created Orthodox medicine? Where did that come from? Well, it actually came from the Rockefeller Foundation back in 1901. The Rockefellers at the time, their family, because of the Standard Oil scandals, no one wanted to be called a Rockefeller. Everybody hated all the Rockefellers. And so his friend, Reverend Gates, went to John D. Rockefeller Sr. and told him, said, well, here's a way we can repair your reputation. And he gave him a good example. There was this man who everybody hated, just like, they were hating you. And he started giving money out for all sorts of philanthropic enterprise. And soon people forgot all of the bad things. All they remembered was this philanthropy that he was pouring out. And he said, so that's what we need to do with you. And so the first thing, because Gates' father was a physician and John D. Rockefeller's father was a quack snake oil salesman, he said, let's form the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research. And so they created this in 1901. And so Rockefeller owned what was called the Drug Trust. That's the major drug manufacturing firms all over the world, Merck, Pharmaceutical, Letterly, all of these drug pharmaceutical companies.
Because the Rockefellers understood taking over an entire industry and controlling the education system is the key to dominating societies. These are monopoly men.
Right, and he also made himself a lot of money, and that's what Gates pointed out to him. Not only can we present this as philanthropy, but by promoting only drugs and the treatments that you promote as being so-called orthodox, that'll feed back into the companies that you own. And, of course, what he didn't always directly own companies. He would buy enough shares so he controlled them.
Yeah, it's very simple for people that don't understand what you're saying. This is all part of the mainline history. It isn't taught in the mainline textbooks, but it is there for those that want to know. They took over the education system in medicine to then direct the course of it into their own companies.
Right, and the way he took over the medical education system at the time, he hired a person called Abraham Flexner, and he told him, what we need to do is have you study the medical schools in the United States and write a critique of it. And, of course, the aim was to remove all nutrition references to nutritional-type treatments from the medical schools. So they closed down half the medical schools in the United States. There were 165 medical schools at the time. Well, he closed half of them. Then he had his anointed medical schools, which he poured his money into, appointed the professors from his own stock of professors. And so they created an educational system that taught the things that he wanted taught. And therefore, every professor that came out of those programs taught the same thing. So you established an orthodox training system where everybody was saying the same thing.
Yeah, they call it now standardization, just like international bodies fund every county and city and fly around the city managers and social planners, where now all the zoning's the same, or the schools are the same, or the anti-gun message is the same, or the anti-sovereignty message. Everything is standardized, so this all goes back to them doing this with banking, and then medicine, and then energy. Please continue.
Right, and if you look at the history of it, it all stemmed from Rockefeller. He did this in all of those segments that you discussed, including the municipalities. and the cities and villages so that he controlled their governments as well. Well, he now has absolute control of all of medical care in the United States, as well as has moved out into the world. He made it international.
And then when they have control of medicine, they can cover up by compartmentalizing and giving false data to the doctors who are compartmentalized and scientists. They can cover up their eugenics program to make sure that real doctors and scientists don't ever discover it, correct?
Right, and the thing is, Lily Kay wrote a book on this. It's the history of molecular medicine and the connection to Rockefeller Foundation and Caltech. It's a very in-depth history of it. She's a professor of history, very well qualified, and it's a very highly acclaimed history of molecular medicine and molecular biology. But in it, she makes the point that the Rockefeller Foundation created molecular biology with the aim of human engineering and social control, and that his goal was to eliminate people in the world who he felt was unfit for life, and to change the minds and the thinking of people by using molecular biology. And
then he pioneered the funding with the British of mind war. That's what Hitler called it, or propaganda.
Right. He turned it international in 1950. What he did, he turned the domestic program over to Ford Foundation, and then he went international, mainly concentrating in Britain with their program of psychological warfare and psychological changing of thinking and mind.
And, Doctor, I want to point something out. You and I didn't talk before the interview. We're not scripting this. I bring up that it then moved to Britain, and you continue with the documentation. Why? I don't come in and throw in little tidbits to show off that I know what's going on. I do that to show we're both saying the same thing because we've read the same mainline history. This is what's really going on. They're poisoning you by design. We're going to get to that. Dr. Russell Blaylock is our guest, an amazing individual. We're so honored to have him with us. We're going to come back and continue with what rules our world. Stay with us. Everything Dr. Blaylock, neurosurgeon, researcher, lecturer, peer-reviewed publisher, is telling you is on the historical record. The eugenicists developed their plans in the 1850s. They took them into governmental control by the 1930s. They implemented it. The Nazis were just a spin-off of that. That's why all this is happening. That's why the poisoning of the population is happening. And they've got one comeback to all this. They say, well, population, we're living longer in the United States. Well, that's not true. Infant mortality is way down. So if you take out infant mortality old numbers, when they're on average, depending on the decade, but going back 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, 30, 40% of children would die by the age of 5. If you take those numbers out, we aren't living as long. Look at Russia. They're living to like 52 now. This is going on by design by the social planners. Dr. Blaylock, please continue. You had gotten to 1950. They go totally international with it. Please continue.
Well, as I said, they turned over the domestic behavioral sciences to the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and its Carnegie corporate foundation turned their attention to the international arena to promote this social engineering. What Rockefeller in 1920 coined the science of man. Basically, it was eugenics because he was funding the majority of the eugenic organizations in the world in the 1910-1920 period. Well, the Ford Foundation essentially is controlled by Rockefeller Foundation. Virtually all the major foundations are controlled by the Rockefeller Foundation. The way they did that is they had their people put in as trustees of these other foundations, and eventually they took over control. So by interlocking, most of the major foundations, now the Bill Gates Foundation, is directly and indirectly controlled by the Rockefeller Foundation. Well,
now let me bring up the sources on that. The church hearings in Congress, as you know, in the 70s, went into the interlocking directorates and the different foundations. And another way, the Rockefellers, by controlling government, if they didn't like a foundation or they didn't play ball, they could sick regulators on them to selectively enforce rules to break them up or bring them under Rockefeller allied control. Go ahead.
Right, and by regulating and controlling most of the major foundations, then they could have block grants, which they did. They directed their projects together toward a certain type of research. For instance, they were very interested in behaviorism, which is psychological control in human engineering, psychobiology. So by using that mass block of money, the other foundations were just very small and of no consequence. But they train these physicians in the United States by targeting certain institutions. For instance, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Duke University, University of Wisconsin were targeted to be their institutions, Caltech. And so they filled it with their people, with their agenda, their social planning agenda and social control agenda. And these people eventually became professors as well, or sent their students as professors in the foreign countries. So it's over the period of time since 1901, they've essentially taken over most of the major universities throughout the world through this interlocking directorate. Now, to show how much money these people have, they did something that was even more powerful, and that is they made sure their people became the advisors for the government when the government was giving out money for these things. Because the psychological program funding by the federal government far exceeded the foundations in the 1950s and 60s. But it was the foundations that controlled the various governmental groups that were dispensing the money. So essentially they controlled the government money, which is tax money.
All right, stay there, Doctor. Only a 1-minute break. Come right back to you as we start the fourth and final hour. We're live at prisonplanet.tv. Dr. Blaylock, please continue.
Yeah, and continuing this line of their obsession with this science of changing the human behavior, and what we call eventually behaviorism in the 1948-50 period. For instance, in 1928 at Caltech, they had a biology division. That's where Rockefeller first was funneling his money to create this science of man idea. And it was focused on eugenics, according to Dr. May. And she said that one of the professors there, Ezra Ghazni, was in fact a leader in the eugenic movement. He was in the American Eugenics Society, the American Social Hygiene Society, Eugenics Research Association, and the Human Betterment Society, which was heavily funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they mailed out tens of thousands of brochures to doctors, teachers, social workers, physicians, university publishers, all these different organizations to make sure that these ideas were in the minds of the American public and acceptable. And just to give you an idea of one of the things that this Dr. Ghazni wrote in Scientific American in 1934, he was urging his readers to embrace Adolf Lorenz, professor of sociology in Vienna, with the idea that sterilization of the unfit would eventually reach all civilized countries as a means, quote, of getting rid of the scum of humanity. So this was a person who was in the Rockefeller Foundation. He was appointed as a professor of this new biology program, molecular biology program at Caltech, and he had a tremendous influence in training of professors that were teaching other biologists and eventually physicians as well. And just to give you some of the quotes she gives in the book to show you that this is not just something I'm pulling out of thin air. In her book, she says, in the 1920s, Rockefeller conceived the idea of the science of man agenda. And she says, quote, the motivation behind the enormous investment was to develop human sciences as a comprehensive and applied framework of social control grounded in natural, medical, and social sciences. Its aim was toward human engineering. The conjunction of cognitive and social goals had a strong historical connection to eugenics. So, you can't make it any plainer. There's just quote after quote through the book in which she keeps saying over and over, his entire plan for this funding was not benevolent. It was to control human beings in the way they would think, to control human thought, and to get rid of people that he considered undesirable. Well, he had all the money at his disposal from Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial, the Ford Foundation. So he had a massive amount of foundation money. In addition, as being advisors to the federal government, all of the money that the government was spending in these areas, which was much greater than even the foundations, was controlled by the foundations itself. So eventually today, they have the wealth of the entire world at their disposal to carry out these programs. We're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars over this planet to promote, and she even mentions New World Order, which she said they helped design with the Council on Foreign Relations. So all of these things are well documented. It's not just something that you or I are making up like that.
And, Doctor, it's horrifying. We've got a break. Quick break, long segment coming up, sir. And it's just horrifying. This is Planet Eugenics. This is Dr. Russell Blaylock is our guest. And coming up at the bottom of the hour, we're going to open the phones up at 1-800-259-9231. 1-800-259-9231. Dr. Blaylock, we're continuing with the history here. I want to get into now what they're setting up, what their master plan is from your deep research, what their goal is. Because studying the world, studying history, doing this radio show, it's been quite a journey for myself in 13 years, because all of us that do research, whether they're a top brain surgeon like yourself or a member of Congress like Ron Paul, we come to the same conclusion separately. This is the stated goal. And I see just a microcosm example. A few years ago, it's in my film Endgame, the legislature was having hearings about why so many foster children were dying, why they were grabbing hundreds of thousands of children, 1.4 million nationwide every year, why 67% of children nationwide and in Texas, the state average was the same as the national average here, of 67% put on psychotropic drugs. And the head of the psychiatry department, Association of Texas, got up and said, well, they have bad gene pools, so that's why we're doing this to these children. And you run into any of these guys, and I've been to a lot of events, and they'll go, yeah, we're getting rid of people. Humans are a disease. We're a parasite, and we, the elite, are getting rid of them. And I tell the story, my mother one time was riding with my father and myself when they were visiting me, and they'd come into the office and seen part of Endgame a year and a half ago being finished. And my mother said, son, I know you tell the truth about all this stuff, and she's got a degree in history, but she said, I can't believe they really want to kill 80% of us. And my dad had never told the story, and he goes, he was a top student in high school and then went on. This is when he was still in high school, was taken to UT as part of this Academy of Sciences. And they tested thousands of kids, and he was down to the top 6, and they took him aside and said, we want to send you to one of these top schools. We want you to be part of the New World Order. We're going to carry out eugenics. The public, we've got to get rid of the majority of the population. And my dad got out of it at that point because he was well read in history. He said, this is really sick. And he thought of the Nazis, but he never told us that. And then I talked to other professionals. They are recruiting the creme de la creme of society, as you just said earlier, into this since the 30s in the Western world. Please continue.
Right, and if you go into the New World Order, she even makes this statement. She said, in December 1946, the Special Committee launched its new policy, accommodating its work for a New World Order, efforts toward internationalism. In other words, they were internationalizing this eugenics program. Now, she says in 1945, because of the Holocaust and the bad publicity that was spreading over the world of social planning and eugenics, they immediately told all of their people to get all of the references in our writings to social control, social planning, and eugenics out of it. We'll just change the names so people won't recognize it. Now, she says this in her book, and she's a major MIT, Johns Hopkins trained historian who's
this
highly
is
recognized.
Crypto eugenics. They overnight changed all the names.
Right. They selectively went out and removed all of these names, so then their publications sounded very high.
Getting rid of the infirm became the bioethicist movement. Just
right.
on and on and on.
Exactly, and of course, one of the most powerful of all the associations is the Social Sciences Research Council, which Rockefeller formed back in, I think, 1904 or 1907, something like that. And now it is an enormously powerful organization that has a number. It has something like, I think in 1950, it had 16 different foundations supporting it, all of them Rockefeller connected. So they were pouring massive money into it, and it virtually controlled the entire social sciences research, not just in this country, but all over the world.
And there, meanwhile, were scouting for all the new brains to make sure that the brain trust was under their control.
Exactly. And by controlling education and controlling the media, they made sure that people all conformed to this way of thinking. Now, here's the way they controlled the people who were dissidents in the intellectual world, people that were professors in the universities didn't want to go along with it.
They cut their funding off.
Well, they would cut their funding off, make sure they never got a research grant. If they were not tenured, they made sure they were fired. And what they also did to elevate their people to the highest rung of being experts in the world is they would give them huge grants so they no longer had to bother with teaching students.
And they would publish their books.
Time writing.
And they would publish their books and make them rock stars in the media.
And they reviewed their books in the journals that they controlled, because one of the things they did went out and controlled all the journals. And so that then their people's books were reviewed with high praise. Any person who was a nonconformist, their book was either not reviewed or given poor reviews. And so when experts were asked for in a certain subject for the federal government, they went to the foundation's experts. They go to the CFR, they go to the SSRC for an expert. And so, oh yes, we have experts in that area, we have experts in population control, we have experts in any subject that you want. And of course, it's all their people with all their philosophy. And as you say, a lot of this population control is buried in language for the general public not to recognize. When we call
and now we're living in really 100 years of this, 70-plus intensely. Continue with closing that gap from the 60s on into today, and what the master plan is, Dr. Blaylock, from your deep research.
Well, the plan is they want to get rid of most of the population, because what they realize is with technological advances, we're not going to need all these workers. I mean, if you look at some of the modern plants, I've been in some of the big plants, and you look at them, and there's a room the size of 3 or 4 football fields, and there's a couple of dozen people working there, because everything else is robotic and electronic and technologically controlled. So
and that's like Bill Joy. That's like Bill Joy whenever he went back in '99 to a big technology conference, and he's worth $4 billion, co-owner of Sun Microsystems. And he came back and wrote an article, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, in Wired Magazine. And he said, look, I met with the elite. They're planning to kill everybody.
Well, they don't need them. And the other thing that you read...
That's what he said. He said they don't need them because of the robotics.
Well, the thing you also realize when you read in the literature is they're scared of them. Because now you have a large segment of your population that's unemployed. They become restless. And then they're a danger to the established order, to the elite. And so the thing that they're trying to do is reduce the population size through various measures like birth control, abortion, all of these different methods, the soft methods to get rid of people. And then, of course, they're using over-vaccination, fluoride, mercury, all of these other things that increase mortality. They're keeping treatments out of the medical world that could save a lot of lives, improve health, because they want people to die off that are not in the elite group. Now, if you look back at the French Revolution, a lot of people don't know this. In the French Revolution, one of the ideas was to kill most of the population of France. And the idea was that we would have a group of elite, and since we've killed 10 million people in France, the rest of us would have all this land to ourselves, a very small population, and we'd have all the food we need, and not these masses to worry about. This
they want to go back. They want to go back to nature and back to neo-feudalism, back to feudalism, hence neo-feudalism, and just to back you up, this all goes back to Malthus in the 1750s. Then you have Galton and others coming out with these very same plans, and that's how. And of course, the elites of the planet, the royalty, love this. This makes perfect sense to them. But you even have these subgroups overthrowing royalty, trying to go to a 10-day work week. They were trying to overthrow the entire previous order and literally play God.
Right, exactly. And they wrote about it openly back then. Now it's more disguised. They changed the language so most people wouldn't really recognize what they were talking about. If you get some of these pamphlets and material from the Social Science Research Council, if you don't know the code words, if you don't know what they're talking about, like sustainability, if you don't understand what that means, it sounds very benign. It sounds very philanthropic, a good thing to do. But if you understand the code words, what they're planning, you realize it's absolute control. It is planning means an elite controls your life. And to put it on a scale that people can understand, all this new move toward eminent domain, where they come in and take a man's business and say, well, for the public good, if we tear down his business and build a high-rise there or shopping center, we'll have a bigger tax base. And so they use eminent domain to take his property. Well, that's central planning. That's social planning.
And their total
they say
rationale
that man doesn't matter.
And their total rationale is social Darwinism. They believe that it's not horrible to kill people or enslave them or inject them with cancer viruses in the vaccines. It is good because they have the right of kings to do whatever they want because they're in the elite position. That is prima facie evidence of their genetic superiority.
That's exactly right, and this is exactly what Dr. Kay says in her history book of molecular biology, that was always their thought.
They want us dead. And they are spraying us, the GMO. You know, there's hundreds of different types of plastics they can make inexpensively. They chose the one formula that releases these toxins, these endocrine disruptors that manipulate our hormone levels. Why did they choose that one type for universal adoption worldwide and sell the factory formulas and machines and systems, sometimes at a loss, to make sure that was implemented in the 50s? Then we see the sperm counts drop. We see the fertility problems. Why do they approve the bovine growth hormone to put in the milk when they know it's linked to cancer and all these problems? Why do they put mercury in vaccines? You know, we've gotten up to the point of their master plan, Dr. Blaylock. This is a short segment. I want to come back in the next long segment and take some calls from Jen and Sherry and Robert and Brad and Dr. Tracy and others that are holding. But any other, I mean, there's so many. We talk for 10 hours. I'm going to definitely have you back if you'll grace us with your time to warn people. I mean, what do we do about this? I mean, we're here trying to warn folks. This is real. This affects everybody, except for a few thousand elitists who even write about how they know they're being hurt by the blowback, but it's okay for the greater work they're doing. I mean, how do we counter this?
Well, it's very difficult because, like I say, they have the entire wealth of the world at their disposal. They essentially control all the media. I mean, back in 1950s, a guy by the name of Manuel Josephson, who was Josephson, who was a medical doctor. He wrote a book on Rockefeller that's quite detailed, very well documented. And he talks about these things in that book as well, how Rockefeller was absolutely obsessed with controlling all information that's available to the public. And the way he did it, even back then, he was spending something like $250 million controlling the media. And by being the major controlling force in literally hundreds, if not thousands, of corporations, all of which advertised in the major media, by 1950s, all the major media was dependent on their advertising dollar. So anything he wanted in the media and anything he didn't want in the media, all he had to do is let them know, well, you would lose your funding if that's discussed.
And a lot of other mainstream media was owned by allies like William Randolph Hearst. Doctor, let's take this tack for a moment and then continue with any other points you had on that first question. There are elitists and wannabe elitists, a lot of these minion professors. And I use the local Austin example of Dr. Eric Pianka. He gives speeches, it's been in the news, where he says we need to kill 90% of the public. And the news, the point is, they get 95% standing ovations. He PowerPoints a huge thing of skulls with a red filter on the wall. This has been on national news. And everybody claps, and the scientists cry. And he goes and speaks to the Royal Academy in England and to the big, Royal Academies and the most prestigious academies in France. I know you've written papers and spoken to some of those big groups as well, but the point is, and the majority of them start crying. This has been in the newspaper because this is their religion. What do you want to say to those people listening I mean, what would be your counter and your argument to them? I mean, reaching out to them and going, my God, look what you've done. I mean, trying to get them to come over to our side of humanity.
Well, this is the collectivist idea, and we're steeped in collectivism. This was the whole program of virtually every president since the Civil War, is the gradual implementation of collectivism in the United States. And collectivism basically says the individual doesn't matter. What matters is the community. Well, community doesn't really mean a lot. If you listen to communist jargon, they say the people. We speak for the people. Well, this mythological people is nobody. It's whoever's in charge, whoever owns the gun. And so the government owns all the power, and so they speak for the people. They speak for the public. So when you hear them saying, this is for the good of the public, or this is good for the...
And then in reality, the eugenicists, the communists, they always kill the people because they hate the people.
Well, they fear the people. Historically, if you look at every dictatorship, what eventually happens is they come to fear the people because they know that what they're doing is unpopular and not working, and then they fear a revolution.
Yes.
And this is what happens with collectivism in the United States, is it becomes more and more collective. People recognize the elitist is now what's causing my financial failure, or the leaders are what's causing, whatever bad is happening.
The parasite. Stay there, doctor. Stay there. We got a break. We'll be right back after this quick break with Dr. Russell Blaylock. Stay with us. Dr. Blaylock, I want to go to calls, but let's say you had 3 minutes on national TV to address the public about the program, the toxins, the poisons, what's in their food and water, and how to avoid it. If you had 3 minutes to boil it down and warn people, because this will be seen, it's being heard by millions, watched on the web right now by thousands. It'll be seen by millions in the aggregate just in the next few weeks as folks put this interview out everywhere. You've got 3 minutes before we go to calls, sir. What is most important for people to know about how dire this is, how real this is?
Well, what they need to know is that the authorities, the people who are defending these things like vaccination, the thimerosal, the fluoride in the water, they never have a defense against the charges that are being made. They never even attempt to answer these questions. When I challenge these people on vaccination, they won't even appear on radio to challenge me. I did that in Hawaii. We challenged the public health to come on and debate what I had to say. They wouldn't even appear because I know something that the other people talking about vaccines are not talking about, and that is when you vaccinate with these large numbers of vaccine, it activates the brain's special immune system and will destroy the connections in the brain, alter the development of the brain, and this is why we're seeing so many of these brain disorders and learning difficulties in our children. Now, these things are backed up by enormous research, thousands of studies all over the world by independent researchers. It's not that the research is not there and the proof is not there, it's that the media won't carry it. None of the major publications will carry this story. They won't interview you. They don't want to have this exposed. So we're having to use the other outlets like the Alex Jones Show and to get this to the public. It's very well documented. If you look at my website, you'll see a lot of references. You read my books, everything is referenced in the scientific literature. It's all peer-reviewed journals from some of the biggest laboratories in the world. But they don't want you to know these things. And so, people need to wake up and realize you're being fed a lot of propaganda. You're being controlled by propaganda. And this is absolutely proven. The Reese Committee, 1950, federal government investigation, the foundations, proved this beyond the shadow of doubt. You can get that book, The Foundations, The Power and Influence, by Wormser, who was the general counsel for the Reese Committee. It's all proven in there. The control that I'm talking about, the book that I've talked about by Dr. K on molecular biology history, it's all documented in there. So the documents are there. People need to quit watching football games all the time and garbage on the television and realize this is a very serious abridgment of our freedom. We're seeing the rise of a world totalitarian government. And if we don't wake up and start doing something now, it's going to be irreversible. Because, like I say, they have the wealth of the world on their side. They have the media. They have Hollywood. They have publishing firms. They've taken over 100 years to institute this,
but
very carefully.
But the public is finally starting to figure out the basics that they're being lied to. So there's a loss of confidence with Congress. One example, with a 9% approval rating. We have to move in now while folks are finally listening and warn them as you're doing, and that's why we salute you. Very well said, Dr. Blaylock. Before we go to these calls, I just want to point out to the military, the police, the bureaucrats, those that enforce this, so many of them I talk to or that email me, they laugh and they say, so what if it's all true? I'm part of the elite. They're all under the same attack. And there's no reason that 99% of the public wouldn't have a stake in fighting back against this. I mean, you know, the final problem is people just have trouble dealing with the magnitude. But this is the nature of our world today, and this is what we're facing. How do you see
Well, you know, if they think they're the elite, they need to read the history of the Soviet Union. All the people who were responsible for bringing the Soviet Union to power were killed. All of them. The entire, virtually the entire NKVD in the beginning was wiped out. That's your police. That's the people who were doing the killing initially. They thought they were protected. They were all killed. The head of the NKVD was murdered. So, you know, if they think they're protected, they're fooling themselves.
Same thing with the Nazis.
And then they get rid of them.
Same thing with the Nazis, now the long knives.
Right, because they cannot be trusted. If you read Soviet literature, the first thing they tell you is the revolutionaries that bring this about can't be trusted because when they see they're lied to, then they want to revolt, so they have to kill them off or put them in gulags.
Well, what did Caesar do after he got power?
It's throughout all of world history from the very beginning. It's like, as I said when we were talking about totalitarian government, the first thing that happens, they fear the people. They fear their own special police. So they periodically have a purge. They get rid of them.
Well, if you study special forces, after they've used special forces for dirty deeds all over the world, they always shut them up or put a conviction on them to discredit them so they can't ever speak out, or they kill them.
Right.
I mean, this is so horrible. Well, God bless you. I want to take some calls here in the final 20 minutes we have left, Dr. Blaylock. But for those that aren't watching on PrisonPlanet.tv, verbally give folks, again, your website so they can check it out. And hopefully you've got some ways for people to try to protect themselves. I mean, we know they're now spraying us, and I've got mainstream news about DARPA in mainstream papers saying they're going to put up towers with ultrasound to soothe the public during crises. Have you seen this research? Where they're
yeah. You see, they've had this decade of the brain. They are pouring literally billions of dollars into neuroscience research. A lot of it is design and how to control people's thinking. And if you read Delgado's book, who is a very highly regarded neurophysiologist, who did depth electrode studies on the brain, how to control behavior. And in his book, he said the last refuge of the individual is his own mind, and they're after that. They want that last refuge, so your thoughts will no longer be your thoughts. And they're using this massive investment in neuroscience to figure out how to do that. And a lot of these techniques are what they're doing, things to make people apathetic, things to make people... You know, I have a friend of mine who worked for the NSA as a debriefer of Soviet defectors. And he told me about all the different drugs they had discovered that could make you change your entire attitude, where anti-communists would become communists. It would completely reverse everything you believed in. That these drugs existed, and they're even more sophisticated now, and techniques are more sophisticated now. And Delgado said, you know, I no longer have to implant electrodes in people's heads. We can do it at a distance by methods like you were just discussing.
Well, that's right. Back in the 1950s, they had these patented in the U.S. alone, and not to mention what's classified. But the thing I saw like 7 years ago, it was in the Baltimore Sun. They said, DARPA that invented the Internet, they're putting up towers to soothe the public. And it was like a weird test bubble. And then it says, this is out of Spectrum Online, which is for tech insiders, mainline magazine. and it says how great it is that, oh, sound waves for brain waves. And it says they can control the public. And then I have CBS newscasts where they say they're going to start doing this to prisoners to reform them. I mean, this is open mind control. The towers are now up, and you tell people this, and they roll their eyes at you.
Well, it's absolutely true. I can tell you, I've spent a lot of time reading neuroscience literature, and these techniques are being developed, and the government is very, very interested in these, and it's being funded by these major foundations.
Unbelievable.
Because this has always been a dream of theirs, is to control human thinking.
Well, the Pentagon says 90% of war is mind war now.
Right.
Exactly. And folks, I mean, we're not in Kansas anymore. Okay, I'm sorry. I was calling Jen Sherry. Now we go to Sherry. I apologize, Sherry. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Dr. Blaylock.
Hi.
I have a question for you, Doctor. Is there any legitimate medical reason why 67% of children in, foster care would be on those drugs? Would there be any reason besides total control?
The federal government says it's for eugenics, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Blaylock.
Now, on drugs for what?
67%, a national average, of foster children are on SSRIs.
Oh, yeah, and, if you look in the physician's desk reference, it says that children shouldn't be on SSRI, that they induce psychosis, they induce a higher incidence of suicide, homicidal thought patterns, so they know that. The SSRI is a very bad medication, and if the FDA was real, if it was really a regulatory agency, it would have been removed long ago.
And, Doctor, as you know, in the trials of the first big one by Eli Lilly in the early 1980s of the SSRI Prozac, they admitted internally that it caused massive increases in psychopathic breaks, homicide, suicide, but they went ahead and approved it.
The girl hung herself, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this is what I talk about in the film Nutrition and Behavior, is that most of the things we see in children that have to do with abnormal behavior are due to a poor diet and toxin exposure. And that if you change that, most of these children undergo a radical improvement in their behavior.
And by the way, let me stop you. Even mainline studies that you see in the press occasionally admit that getting them off dyes, getting them off processed sugars, getting them exercise has massive, better numbers than Prozac, which they even show is detrimental. Go ahead.
Well, all this is in the mainline peer-reviewed journals. It's not, from something in alternative medicine. This is in mainline medicine.
Did you see the latest?
The fact that most physicians don't read this.
Did you see the latest?
They don't read the research journals. They're not even aware of this.
Did you see the latest number from 2008 that 100 million prescriptions for SSRIs in 2008 in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. And when Bush had the program where he was going to have all the children examined psychologically and have them placed on medication if they needed it.
New freedom.
This is absurd. That's not the function of the federal government, to have people psychologically evaluated and placed on medication.
But that's
something as dangerous as SSRI medication.
But that's what the eugenicist Aldous Huxley, whose brother later ran the UN, Julian Huxley, who became the head of the Eugenist Society and the head of the Transhumanists, he said they would drug the public. That's where THX 1138 and Brave New World come from, because that was the plan, and now they've got 100 million people on them.
Sure. I mean, in the book Brave New World, they talked about the drug Soma, and that you would calm people down, and then you'd have another drug to excite them when you wanted them excited, and when you wanted them apathetic, you put them back on the Soma again.
And now they even have an SSRI on the market, Doctor, called Soma.
Absolutely. And his book, Brave New World Revisited, goes into the nonfiction description of all of these things.